some shows you're gonna love. There's some shows you're gonna enjoy, and this is one of those shows.
My goal is to make you snort chocolate milk at least twice through your nostrils.
You think that's easy?
I'm gonna make
it's not
you
easy.
I'm gonna make you, see? We're getting you warmed up.
Boy, that takes me back so many years, I don't want to count.
I was the youngest sister, so I'm really accustomed to being tortured by 3 older brothers.
Yeah. I'll bring the chocolate milk. Okay, that is Kathy Higa. She's an entrepreneur. She's a legislative aide to Senator Sam Sloan, and she's a Burt Lum groupie, among
Yes,
other things.
I am a Burt acknowledged.
Many things
Going to a support group.
Okay, and we're here on Community Matters, because this is really about community. And this is about seeing things in Hawaii through the eyes of someone who has come back. And that's why, we can talk about anything, but let's start with that, okay?
The prodigal daughter.
The prodigal daughter.
Yes.
Write that down, Zuri. The prodigal daughter, okay?
I'm just coming down from a Sunday, so the biblical references may be rife.
Yeah, now, you can have Sunday all week long if you like. Okay, so you left.
I did.
Talk about it.
Well, let's first set a little context about that, because I'm an unusual case in a number of ways. I was born here when it was a territory, and I'm really proud of that. I love that it says Territory of Hawaii on my birth certificate. It's a matter of real pride. But my family left and went to Okinawa, which is where I grew up when I was just about 2. So life in Hawaii, from my point of view, was always really really the high points. And in some respects, it's those moments that I cherish the most. As a kid, I was never exposed to the day-to-day mundane things of how you make a living and traffic and any of that growing up. It was all the great things about Hawaii. So in some respects, I think I got a concentrated dose of the things that that I anyway really value the most about being here, about community back in the 60s and 50s. In the old days, growth was another one. Everything was new. I mean, the buildings that are on this street, this building wasn't here when we come back on vacation. So it was the wonder and the miracle of something that was so new. And then I graduated from high school and moved back to go to the University of Hawaii one year, and maybe that was almost an overly concentrated dose of some of the things that you don't have when you really have to concentrate your resources and focus on serving as many people as possible rather than people with a special interest like nerds. So I went to the mainland and stayed for 35 years because I ended up in Silicon Valley in 1975, or 76. Who could not?
That was a great time to be there.
Unbelievable.
I would talk about growth, huh?
Yeah, it was like Hawaii in the 40s and 50s, I think. There were still orchards underneath the companies that are Intel and, Facebook and Sun and all of that. It was grapes and strawberries and almonds. And we really did see every brick, every street, and these today companies that are not just icons and brands, but are pillars of a global industry. So it was the heyday. It was exciting times. It was like being at a carnival.
Yeah. Compare it then and now.
So I think the other thing that I have to admit is I continued, coming home as all of us do, at least for Christmas, and in the last 12 years, or even more than that, more often as my parents got older, I'd come back and spend, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. When my mother became very ill in the early 2000s, I spent about 3.5 years here, 80% of my time. But still, you see the good parts. And although I won't say that my mom being terminally ill was a good part, what happened around her illness was all of the good things in Hawaii. I mean, grass was dead in the paths between our yard to our neighbors because people were coming every day with papayas and, little think flowers and little notes for my mom, and multi-generational families, from my parents' age, all the 442 families to the grandchildren were coming, and it was like, again, a concentrated dose of the things that, as a kid, were burned in. And then I moved back again in 2010, full-time. So I live here now, taking care of my dad. And it's the first time since I was 2 that I have literally pulled up stakes, moved home, and said, I'm not gonna stay here for a long time. I live here now. And there's a psychological commitment to what that means, and a whole different set of challenges about how to become better integrated, how to bring the things that I've learned and experienced in my life, in my career, that's taken me all over the world.
What was your career?
Well, I started out in, believe it or not, marketing finance at a company called Four-Phase Systems, which was subsequently bought by Motorola. I then joined a startup company, because everybody has to do that, and I was 22. So it was a startup person in a startup company, and I was a system designer. So I actually worked with engineering teams, leveraging my industrial design background to do very large-scale system architecture for material handling, manufacturing, and distribution systems. So I designed systems for Crown Zellerbach, Armor Meats, Hallmark cards, never saw so many Valentines in my life, General Electric Corporation, and then went from the more technical side to, on a whim, I called a friend and I said, I don't know how to look for a job, because at school they came to recruit. And so I just found this job, and then the second job I got because one of the people I worked for at Four-Phase went to this startup company and took me with him, but I gotta get out of there. I mean, I'm traveling all the time. I feel like I'm in way over my head, leading and managing teams and these really big projects. And I wanna go someplace where there's more young people, there's all these old people all over the place, And so he introduced me to somebody at a real good friend of his at this company, and he said, they're kind of offbeat. You just go talk to them. So I went to interview for the first time at Apple Computer on March 17th. It was St. Patrick's Day, and I was terrified. I walked in, and I was still a little, suit, an establishment, IT establishment. And I walk in at St. Patrick's Day, they've got green beer. They have dyed the chickens green, and the chickens running all over. And
that was the younger Apple.
Yeah, the very senior manager that I'm talking to might have been 30, And he was wearing green, and they had green food. And I was actually a little scared, because it really didn't look like grown-ups, and it was this huge company. I'm thinking to myself, are you just doing this for my benefit? Because I said I wanted to work with young people, or because, as it turned out, it really was, right? The average age in the company was 26. We really needed adult supervision. When the second generation management team, John Scully and those folks came in, they had consultants from Boston Consulting Group, organizational consultants, come in, and somebody met with me and said, this is like the Montessori school for management, only they give you really big manipulatives. And so I kind of followed that path at Apple, and when in the midst of the reorganization brought on by the next generation management, they said, you have maybe a little too much responsibility, but you've done really well, so why don't you survey the alternatives? We'd like to offer you a number of jobs in the company, which was a way of saying we really need to take away some of your ammo and sharp objects. And I went to work for a guy who is now an icon in the industry, a guy named Bill Cleary, who subsequently joined the creative director from Apple, Tom Suter, and another colleague, Mark Kwame, and they formed a company called CKS Partners, US Web. and sort of pioneered the idea of online marketing and the next generation agency. So that's how, Bill had come from Kodak in marketing. And so it was my big chance to actually learn what marketing was, because that wasn't exactly a well-known discipline in high tech. We just made really cool stuff, and it was an opportunity to learn to do something. Hopefully I do better now, which was to, Bill said, I'm offering you a job because you're one of the few people who has made technology intelligible to those of us who have no clue what a personal computer or semiconductor or microprocessor are.
What year was this?
It was 1982, 83.
Okay. Ooh, okay.
And that's what I then did. So that's how I came to have a career in public relations and marketing, communications in the early days for very young companies, a lot of startup companies that were dominated by people who spoke in tongues, Pascal and COBOL and,
So what did you learn?
I think probably there were, I can't even begin to make a list, but if there are some things I learned that I think will follow me the rest of my life. One is that technology is the development of a set of tools and enabling technologies for humans. So the lifelong pursuit of ways to humanize technology and make it more accessible and usable. That was a fundamental precept at Apple that they've now driven into the consumerism of thousands of products, including their own. I think that was a real lesson, because at the time I'd come out of Stanford, and the nerd kingdom, and the things we were inventing were so cool. I mean, there's stuff that had never been made before, and the idea that it could even be done was really amazing. And then you'd be extolling the virtues of this unbelievable thing, a Winchester drive, or solid state memory, to people, like your mother. And they go, oh, that's nice, honey. Do you want another musubi? Are you getting paid? Do you have benefits? And I felt for the longest time like they didn't appreciate and understand what we were doing. But when I moved out of the realm of just the second lesson, taking a paycheck from somebody, into being an entrepreneur and having to, and frankly, being judged by what Lance Hanchey, my near husband, longtime partner, would say is people voting with their dollars. You know you're right and that it matters and you've made an impact when people actually are willing to invest. And not just the venture capitalists, but consumers. That's hard-earned money when a family takes their $400 or $500 or $700 in the case of an iPad, $1,000, and goes down and buys one. They're an investor.
Yes.
And so the lesson was that this whole business of being more articulate, more clever about discussing technology was really essential to finding out how people perceive the value proposition that we as an industry have now expanded into a global industry, a set of global industries. So lesson number 2 is people matter. And making money doesn't matter so that I can line my own pocket. Selfishly, it's a validation of whether what I'm doing matters. And that may be sort of, an anachronism, a thing of the past. But for those of us who are getting up there, I'm very close to collecting Social Security and damn proud of it, because I plan to return those checks, just like Senator Sloan says, not one taxpayer dollar. It's become really important. I mean, I think you have to have an enormous ego to be an entrepreneur. But it is important to be continually humbled every time somebody buys your product or an investor writes a check, because they're investing in you and they're providing you with validation. So the inverse of that is the third lesson. If they don't do that, they're not stupid. I grew up in the industry when in the 80s, 70s, people would say, well, they don't understand, how great this is. And we still hear a lot of that. And probably for longer than I should admit, maybe 25 years. you know, I subscribe to a certain amount of that, you know, they don't get it, you know, and when you hear that said so often, you know, you have to admit that the continuity might be you. That there are millions of people who haven't gotten this company, this product, this project, this mess, and there's dozens of them. Maybe you're the reason that they're not getting it. And not getting it, not buying your product, not investing in your company is valuable feedback. So I don't know whether that's the wisdom of age or just the admission of that my checkered past littered with as many failures as successes, but I think those are the three takeaways, and they are struggles that I've actually even had moving back here as a person.
Before you get to that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Sure.
we have achieved the wisdom of the ages
Yes.
here. So now we're going to take a break.
Okay.
Okay, that's Kathy Higa, entrepreneur and much more here on Community Matters, where we're talking about seeing Hawaii through the eyes of someone who has returned. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Ethan Allen. I host Likeable Science on ThinkTech Hawaii, and I do this because I care about science literacy in Hawaii. I want to spread the understanding that science is a vital and interesting part of everyone's life. I want to make sure the broadest possible spectrum of people understand the beauty and the value of science and realize that science plays out each and every day of their lives. I want you to understand that science is fun. So we bring onto this show each week guests who are scientists, from astronomers to zoologists, and we talk about what they do and how they do it. But most importantly, we talk about why you should care about their work, why you should see that their work has value and impact on your life. So I hope you'll join us Fridays, 1 p.m. here on ThinkTech Hawaii. You can watch us via live stream. You can watch us recorded on Olelo, and you can see us each week. We hope you'll join us.
Okay, we're back. We're live. We're here with Kathy Higa. We are enjoying ourselves. You know, fabulous. I knew it was going to be and it is fabulous. Because
I
she's
don't
an
know if I'm
entrepreneur.
having fun
She's
yet,
a
but
philosopher.
I'll think
and she
about
gives
it.
us wisdom. I mean, what more could you ask in the world? Okay, and she's telling us about her departure and life on the mainland, and now is for the second part of our show. We're going to, you know, re-enter the portal. So my next question for you, after hearing those points of wisdom, I'm still reeling from that. So, this is my question. So, you came back.
I did. I did. And I have to, so I'm going to throw the cards face up and say, unless certain events had not occurred, I probably wouldn't. But my dad, who is hilariously funny and is my dad, who gave a lot to this state and to our country, he's a 442 vet, was getting old. And somebody needed to come back and be mouthy and pushy and boss him around, and we just celebrated his 93rd birthday, so he's going on 94. And he says he's gonna live to 100. So that's why I'm here, and while I'm here, in case you hadn't noticed, I have a tendency to be nosy and pushy and bossy and get involved and wanted to do something. And that's how I met you, right?
Yes.
Because one of the people I latched onto, I still don't know whether he thinks of it as a blessing or a curse, was Bert, because we share, I think, a lot of values about the value of technology.
What is it about Bert?
Well, first of all, he's funny. He's hilariously funny. And he's crazy smart, you know. And although we are both kind of technologists at the core, and that was how we originally met, you know, he's into all kinds of things, you know, art and music and literature, and mostly people, you know. And with respect to technology, the ways in which we use it to further invest, in his case, in a number of causes that are for the common good. Civic engagement, open data, those things that he is
Civic
the driving
engagement for
force.
the common good. Where have I heard that before?
Bert, I didn't
that's
make.
part of our mission statement here.
Oh, yours?
In ThinkTech.
Did I? I did
can-
not.
I
I
can
did
give you
not.
living proof
I
of that
don't
in
have a very
writing.
good memory. I promise you.
Okay, so what is Bert doing that made you want to, spend time?
Well, leading up to when I met Bert, and I think it was 2011. I had made a number of incursions into the tech world here, minor incursions, try to, reconnoiter, see what was happening, how to get involved, how to make money. So why Bert? Because he's a nonprofit. It's a really small community,
Yeah.
And the biggest tech events here would have like 30 people, other than maybe Hawaiian Telecom University, but those were all customers, free food. I mean, how do you resist? And then I met Bert, and I went to the first of his, I think it was a hackathon or so, I can't remember.
Yeah. There are many different kinds,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah, but one of his events, and there were more people there, not just the government stakeholders who stood to be beneficiaries of their good work, not just the guys who gave money, and young people, which in my world, and I'll call it that, the world that I came from, high tech, Silicon Valley, if you don't have a whole lot of really young people trying to do the stuff that you already failed at, you have no innovation. They humble you every day, because the old people go, that'll never work. But if they don't keep trying and trying again, the breakthroughs that we've had would never occur. So, not seeing young people except on the UH campus, that kind of bugged me, and then I get around Bert, who's even older than me, Bert, shout out.
Oh,
Couple
I didn't know
years,
that. You
couple
heard it
years.
here on ThinkTech, yeah.
There were all
We're
of
gonna do
these
math
young
in a minute,
people.
yeah.
And he'd found them, and he created these really just great landscapes for them to produce their art and to demonstrate their phenomenal talents and their ability to shape Hawaii and frankly the country in a lot of ways that we would never imagine.
You've had a chance to look, you've been back for a few years, and so you made the comparison between what you saw there and what you see here. Where is Hawaii right now? Where is it on the continuum of where it's going?
With respect to the technology industry or business development? That is such a difficult question. How many seconds do I have to answer? Because I don't
3.
think there are enough shows here for that.
Just whatever answer comes to mind.
I think we're at a point where we actually have to put a stake down and say the path of the last 30 years isn't the path forward. That's inertia. And we're not the moon. We can't keep going around and around and around in the same circle and expecting different results. With respect to technology, I've been invited to attend and been asked for my input a number of times on technology industries, strategic development initiatives, that type of thing. And I get these memos that say, well, in Raleigh-Durham, they did this, and they had these ingredients, and we have all the same ingredients. We have a university, and, all of that kind of stuff. And I look at it, and first of all, in context, the quantity, the volume, as well as the quality in some cases of what we have is significantly different. And that's not a judgment of better or worse, although in some cases I think it is. What I think it ignores is that every one of those environments, and let's look at others, Massachusetts and biotech, the Pacific Northwest and biotech, other regions of the country where great things happened with the creation of new industries. Or let's even go back 100 years and talk about the auto industry. They looked at what they had at hand in their environment, and they said, let's take this and this and this and make something out of it. So we don't have what they have in the Bay Area to create a Silicon Valley. We don't have a Sand Hill Road that has untold trillions of dollars in private capital waiting to throw itself on an expanded deal flow. I mean, that's the purpose of accelerators. Purpose of accelerators where they had too much money and not enough deals. Over here, we don't have enough money or enough deals. So just taking that model and dropping it in here isn't gonna work. But we have other things that are great, including people who are so determined they won't give up even when they're on a failure path. I mean, I'm serious about that. You can call
But that's
them,
not commendable.
abusing the energy to continue down the wrong path is not commendable. But you have to value the energy and say, well, what if we just moved it a little bit? And I'm afraid the moving it a little bit, I believe, is into areas that I'm not a domain expert. I don't know squat about agriculture.
Moving it just a little, yeah. So, okay, so, I mean, this is really interesting to me. 30 years, that if I roll the tape back, 30 years is George Ariyoshi, who cared a lot about tech, who built the HTDC and the Manoa Innovation Center.
That's right.
Was involved in so many things that are tech and also non-tech. I mean, he fashioned a relationship with Japan. He became an international person. I mean, I've talked to him.
He was a great man.
He was a great man.
And
He
a
is
great
great
leader
man,
of the
a great
state.
leader.
Yes, he is, I'm sorry.
But what
He's-
happened is
he's
it
still
didn't
with
get
us.
traction, Kathy. You know, for some, you know, I really want to explore this with you. I mean, this is the core of my reason to want to talk to you. It didn't get traction. We understood. We could see what was going on. We had some leaders among us who were visionary like him, others too. But we just didn't grab it. We didn't understand it, maybe. We didn't act in accordance with it. And so the decades went by in a circle, as you said. And if you keep repeating the loop, you can't expect anything better than what you got the first time. So what did we miss?
I can only venture to make a couple of, well, to say some things from my own very narrow point of view. And I'll condition everything I say by saying that. I'm one person. And everybody who knows me knows terribly opinionated. You try to be well informed. So let me say from my narrow point of view. And in the context of the recognition that many of those who failed in technology succeeded in very large ways, in other ways, in helping to build the state. They dealt with issues that were much broader than just this industry. So having said that, you know, everybody can't score a 10 on everything. But I think there are two things. One is the ability to scale. And that has to do with some things that sound pretty dry and clinical. Capital, labor pool, you know, and exportability. So at the time, 30 years ago, most of what we did was hard product, you know, and even software was on disks and diskettes and things like that. In a virtual world, it might have been different. If the virtual world, the online world, e-commerce had existed 30 years ago, the outcome might have been very different.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that confuses our ability to move forward. We have to look at the successes and failures in the context of the time. You know, we can't fold space and time and say, you know, if Governor Ariyoshi and those who started the incubators and the Innovation Center had only known about the internet, I mean, we didn't. So there's that piece. I think for their time, they were doing the best they could, but we have then, and roll the tape all the way forward, continued to deal with the same issues. The existence of capital. It's arguable that, you know, Facebook didn't need to raise $100 billion, you know, $500 million, $500 million in private capital before they became a company. But they did. And if we wanted to have a Facebook here, where would we get $500 million in private capital?
Hold that thought, because I got to take another break.
Sure.
But when I come back, I'm going to ask you, why the people who could have invested locally, and the big trusts and landowners who had the cash never invested it? I'm going to ask you that. See
Oh,
what you
hard
do with that
questions.
hard question. We never promised you a rose garden. That's Kathy Higa, an entrepreneur and much more here on Community Matters, talking about seeing Hawaii through returning eyes. Ooh, we'll be right back. We'll return.
Aloha, my name is Josh Green. I'm a senator from the Big Island in the ER position. Every other Tuesday, I get to host a show here on the ThinkTech program about healthcare. We call it Healthcare in Hawaii. It's really enjoyable for me to bring other healthcare leaders from around the state to talk about our pressing issues. Hawaii has long been the health state, but we need to keep up the momentum, the inertia, and with your help and with your participation, we can come and share all of the big issues that are pressing day to day. Thanks for joining us every Tuesday, alternating weeks from 2 to 2:45.
Okay, we're back, and Kathy and I are looking at the Twitter feed here. We have something from Mark Ward to ThinkTech High. ThinkTech High is our Twitter address. Kathy Higa, let's see. First one, having spent a great deal of time on the mainland, in what areas, if any, does Hawaii need to improve? We're going to go to that. But thank you for that, Mark. Then Mark writes the second one. This is Ask Mark Ward. Kathy Higa needs to have a regular commentary segment on your network. She has a compelling voice and informed opinion. You think? You're not going to get any disagreement around here, Mark.
Thank you so much. That's really flattering, and I'm embarrassed at the same time.
You've succeeded in embarrassing Kathy Higa, and that's not easy, I think.
Oh, no. No.
Okay, so we have trusts. We have the employees' retirement system. We have Kamehameha schools. We have less now than we had, but we have probably increasing amounts of money because it's all land-based. And we have, billions are out there held by large trusts and landowners, and they have not invested in tech. Now, they could be another sort of investment source like Silicon Valley, maybe not, as big in total, but they got a lot of money. Why? Pourquoi? Pourquoi non?
I am positive that the answer to that question is far more complex than I could begin to even discuss. But I think maybe at least one sort of simple-minded insight is that people do what they know. That's not unusual, and it's not even bad. So there's an argument to be made that the Kleiner Perkins, the Mayfield funds, the Draper Fishers, these are the cornerstones of Silicon Valley investing, don't know how to invest in real estate. I don't think anybody at Kleiner Perkins even left and went off to join a real estate development partnership. So there's an argument to be made that you do what you know, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think that the point to be made is how they could have participated, not just for the enrichment of their own coffers, but potentially to use their throw weight and their capital to increase the amount of leverage we have in the state. And I don't know the answer. So, this may all have been done. I actually don't know whether they, for example, became limited partners, investment partners in large venture capital firms, and to what extent they participated. I know that.
I mean, at that level.
Yeah, I know that some of them, Bishop Estate Trust, for example, did have limited partnership interests in investment banking funds that were managed by Goldman Sachs.
They had a piece of Goldman Sachs.
Yes, they did. And
huge amount of investment.
Exactly. And of course, there were nasty things said about that, but as we know, money isn't necessarily always a clean world. It's a complex world. So I privately, sitting around in my living room over a beer and being, snarky, would really like to have seen the large stakeholders here invest differently. But at the same time, you can't say it was wrong or necessarily bad, because the worst thing that can happen to an entrepreneur, I'll tell you, is to get money from the wrong investor.
Why?
Because if they can't flex their model for investing, for example, from something as hard as bricks and mortar real estate to something as nebulous as, you know, a virtual online marketplace, and how they measure, what their metrics are for return on capital, you'd have a really bad relationship because they thought they were going to invest and get X, and you didn't know how to express to them, again, the communication issue and the alignment of agenda, that they were going to be holding their pants and really, really scared until you showed that return on capital.
So is it fair to say that despite, you know, the vision of guys like George Ariyoshi, despite the fact that he could see this clearly and the need and the value and all that, and he wanted it, and he wasn't the only one, but the level of sophistication in those who would have invested had they known more, and the level of sophistication in the public who might have supported this, the level of sophistication in the legislature who could have offered incentives and who knows what kind, you know, tax credits, what have you, to incentivize the development of the tech industry. They just didn't know. And nobody ever showed them or told them or taught them.
I think that's in part true. And I'll actually admit to being in the enclave of people who share some of that responsibility, right? Because again, and I don't mean to, I'm not an apologist, you know, for any of those good people. I was not here. But I have to say from my own point of view, I even look back at my own failures and successes in context and go, wow.
Did I do that?
Yeah. What I will say is that where we started this conversation, you look back, for example, on Governor Ariyoshi and those who preceded him, but even at Governor Ariyoshi, that was still, as recent as that was, at a time when we were still building streets in Honolulu. These buildings were going up.
I remember all the pictures of dirt construction sites just after statehood, where the whole place was a construction site.
Yeah, my parents bought property in Ainahaina, and the chickens have come back to roost, literally. I mean, that was ag land, right? And I don't mean to get into some convoluted discussion of land use. They were building a nation. They were building the state. So if they missed a few things, you know, about high tech or biotech or something.
Okay, last question, because we're almost out of time. I hate to tell you that. I'm so apologetic
Oh, no, I'm
about
so
that.
glad.
We could go on. Yeah, we have a few minutes left. So you know, you've looked at this, you've worked in the legislature, you've seen policy unfolding, you've seen the level of sophistication, whatever it is, in the square building, and you've seen the tech industry through Burt Lum and many others. I watch you, I know, okay? Or at least I watched you the day I met you anyway, and I know. So, is it too late for us?
It's never too late. I think what we need is to, again, look at the resources we have, number one. And number two, look at what part of the technology industry we want to participate in. Because it isn't like a thing. It's not just, you know, software and hardware or consumer versus business to business. There are so many striations, variations, and stratum of the so-called technology industry. What I think we need to get focused on is which piece. I mean, there are very clear advantages to investing strategically, for example, in a technology service industry. We have local talent here, some of which actually comes naturally out of our partnership with our occupation, depending on how you see it, of the federal government. In cybersecurity as an example, and there are 2 or 3 really good companies here, ACT, Chad Kobashigawa, you don't get more local than that, part Hawaiian, who have built good businesses and who have not just the intellectual capacity in the labor pool, but the commitment, you know, to building that asset here locally. And I think we just have to look a little
This
different.
sounds anecdotal. I mean, it is anecdotal. A little flash here, a little flash there. Certain connection, which you know, you've seen and I've seen through Burt Lum and others, where they actually connect, and that certainly, that kind of synergy, it really means something. But where is critical mass? At what point would I say to you, Kathy, we're here, we've arrived. I mean, or let me ask you, when will it be that we will have arrived? How will we know that we have achieved critical mass?
Well, I'll tell you, one of them is when the state isn't the largest investor. When taxpayer dollars aren't actually required to be at the vanguard, of every exploratory effort. When a private investor with my money is willing to put them down and say, I think this is reasonable risk. Not just once or twice, but in a long-term and sustained way. I don't know if that makes sense, but, that was one of the reasons I threw myself at Senator Sloan, and he was gracious enough to allow me into his office, because I said I've never seen the state as such a large player in the development of private industry, and I don't understand it.
That's interesting.
And I still don't.
It isn't that old. I mean, the state's involvement in this is not that old. He could tell you that really.
Yeah. And
before maybe the year 2000, the state was not involved in
not in this way. And I'm familiar at least with the history, and certainly from Senator Sloan and others. But it is different. And there are ways that we could really, really, I think, make that work. But it's like all things, and something I'm learning to adapt to here. It's a barn raising. It's a communal effort.
Oh, were that only to take place. So your role going forward, you're not, without possibilities here. You have all this, education you've got on the mainland. You look through those fresh eyes at what's happening here. You can compare notes with people who could put you in touch with new possibilities. You know entrepreneurs that are promising. What's your role going forward, Kathy Higa?
I'm honestly still searching for the right answer to that. And in the meanwhile, what I do is try to participate where I am relevant. Because I'm not actually relevant even in the technology industry here in all of the ways that I might be in California or Boston, another place that I live. And I continue learning. And that's someone I would say to any young entrepreneur, anyone in the technology industry, that's probably rule number 4, right? Is never, ever stop learning. And never, ever sit back on your laurels and believe that you really know all that much. And that would be my request, my most fervent hope of so many people in the power structure here. If I got to say it in Kathy E's, can I know no expletives? Don't ever think you know squat, because everything that you know today will be obsolete tomorrow. That's been my life as a technologist in the technology industry, as an entrepreneur. And if you don't continue to re-examine what you thought last night in the light of what's happened today, no one moves forward. I tell this to kids when I'm teaching them to drive. If you're going forward, you look in the rear view mirror very, very differently. But nobody ever moved forward looking strictly at the past. So it's a really interesting kind of a dance, isn't it? How to look forward, guided by the past, your successes and your failures, but in light of the broader context in which you exist. That's really hard. That takes a lot of people. And it takes sometimes subordinating yourself from your godlike status as a result of education or, your 3rd generation family inherited wealth or whatever it is, and saying, I'm just a person. And I am the sum of the things that I learn, including from the person right in front of me.
I told you I was going to love this show. That's Kathy Higa. She's an entrepreneur. She's legislative aide to Senator Sam Sloan she's a technologist, and she knows bird well. And she knows me.
And aren't I lucky? And my cell phone probably is ringing birds going, you didn't say that.
Here on Community Matters, and we're seeing it through her eyes as a returning person to Hawaii. Thank you so much, Kathy.
Thank you.
Aloha.
How did I do?